India's capital is home to around 1,100 Rohingya refugees. Today was an emotional roller coaster for them. First came a surprise announcement. It was made by Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri. This is what he said. Listen to this, I'm quoting. India has always welcomed those who have sought refuge in the country. In a landmark decision, all Rohingya refugees will be shifted to flats in Bakarwala area of Delhi. Now, some quick facts. The Rohingya are an ethnic minority from Myanmar. They were systematically abused and killed by the Myanmar army. So in 2017, they fled. Almost 740,000 of them arrived in Bangladesh, and from there, many of them made their way to India. Right now, they live in tents. They're designated as illegal foreigners by India. So naturally, the announcement was a surprise. It signaled a change in India's policy. Well, it turns out that was not the case. Hours later, the Indian Home Ministry issued a clarification, and I have their statement too. This is what they said. Ministry of Home Affairs has not given any directions to provide flats to Rohingya illegal migrants at Bakarwala in New Delhi. Illegal foreigners are to be kept in detention centers till their deportation as per law. Needless to say, it's confusing. Did the minister get his facts wrong? Or was this a belated U-turn by the government? The fact is, we can't be sure, and we don't want to speculate. The first announcement did attract a lot of criticism, though. After all, the current government had promised to deport the Rohingya refugees, so giving them flats enraged their supporters. But the issue itself is not new to India. More than 17,000 Rohingya currently live here. These are refugees certified by the United Nations. Unofficially, the number could be much higher. According to some reports, as many as 40,000 Rohingya live in India. The question is, what must India do with them? Resettle them in India or deport them back to Myanmar? Now, for the second option, deportation, you need Myanmar's regime on board. But right now, that's not possible. Back in 2020, the army captured power in Myanmar, the same army that carried out the genocide against Rohingya. They held a coup in 2020. They're in power now. So repatriation has been delayed. What about domestic and international laws? What do these laws say about refugees? The international practices are set out by a couple of laws, the UN Refugee Convention of 1951 and the UN Refugee Protocol of 1967. What do they say? Well, they lay down a number of obligations, but the biggest one is this. No country shall force refugees to return to a country where they face serious threats to life or freedom. And the Rohingya check this box. The United Nations calls them the most persecuted minority in the world. Then how can India deport them? Because India never signed the refugee conventions, and with good reason. The conventions were largely built for the Western world. Their borders were perfectly defined, their economies were advanced, so the West could afford these conventions. Well, that's not the case in India's neighborhood. Here, the borders are extremely porous. In some places, they're yet to officially be defined. So India never signed the refugee convention. Also, India never drafted a national refugee policy, which means there is no document that Indian leaders can refer to. There are no laws that the judiciary can uphold in India. The whole thing is based on the government in charge, the government of the day. I'll give you some examples. Last year, there was an attempt to block the deportation of Rohingya. The matter was heard by the Supreme Court of India. The court sided with the government and refused to stay the deportation. This year, the court went a step further. Let me quote from what the Chief Justice said. Why do the courts have to deal with all issues? These are political issues. These must be taken up with the government. If we have to take up all PILs, why is an elected government there? Why are the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha there? Well, he's got a point. Refugees are a political issue. They must be dealt with by elected leaders. As for courts and laws, they must be like checks, guidelines for our politicians to follow, which brings us to India's track record. Even without these guidelines, India has actually done quite well. The world's most famous political refugee lives in India, the Dalai Lama. But maybe it's time to institutionalize that policy, define who is a refugee and who is a migrant, spell out specific rights for them, where they can live, what amenities they can get. All of this must be formalized because India's refugee problem is not going away. We're surrounded by porous borders and unstable regimes. Any official policy could prevent mix-ups like today's. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.